The Dungeons & Dragons DLC is finally here, including a new survivor duo, a new fantastic map, reviews perks, and the Lich, one of the most complex killers ever introduced.
I will play my role for now.
And let's start talking about Vecna, because I have a lot to say about him. Vecna is the first killer in a long while where I have significantly more fun playing against him as a survivor rather than playing the killer himself. And that's simply because of how fun the chest and items mechanic is for survivors, and most importantly, how easy it is to counter Vecna. It's funny how the killer with the most powers to choose from also is the one that feels the most powerless against good survivors. But that doesn't mean he is not fun. So let's talk about Vecna's power. Vecna has access to 4 spells which he can select by using the secondary button and opening a radial menu screen to choose your spells from. Each of them have their own cooldown that is independent of the rest, and just like with the recent killer trend, you start the match with all powers on cooldown for 25 seconds, and after that, each spell takes 50 seconds to recharge. Survivors, on the other hand, have access to special items that will help them each time Vecna uses one of his spells: 2 gauntlets, 2 boots, and 2 special items. You can get these items by opening treasure chests, which will roll a d20. Depending on your roll, you will get a certain quality of item. Low rolls will give you basic DbD items, medium and high rolls will either give you boots or gauntlets, and if you roll a d20, you will get a special item which gives you entirely new powers. However, if you roll a d1, well, this happens. I will talk about the items individually, but first, let's go back to Vecna's 4 spells. The first spell that Vecna has is Fly, which is his mobility power. By casting this spell, you're able to move very fast for a short duration, similar to Hillbilly, and also ignore pallets as well as windows, after which your power stops. The items survivors get to counter these are the Sky Guards, which will reveal the aura of Vecna anytime he flies. This for me is the most fun spell Vecna has, as it gives him mobility and also the chance to use his spell in order to block vaults, similar to how Wraith can do it. However, the issue with this spell is something that you will see me mention a lot. The delay removes most of the chances you have to use this spell during a chase. This is because after you land, it takes quite a long time in order for you to attack or change spells, so unless the survivor is out positioned, they can simply hold W and escape. Not only that, if you vault a window or pallet, there is a short period of time where you still don't have collision, so they can just vault back while you endure the long cooldown. There is a way to bypass this, and that's with perfect timing, so you cancel the flight the moment you vault, but currently in the PTB there is a game-breaking bug that makes you stuck on vaults, so I cannot even test this properly. Still, this is something that can be perfected and timed by good Vecnas, which adds to his skill ceiling, so it's something I love. Also, this spell is the reason why Bamboozle got nerfed, and now vault powers like Wesker or Legion do not work with it. Instead, if you want to block vaults, you have to use his Iridescent add-on, which makes flight a very useful tool during a chase. I personally think this spell is good as is. Yeah, the slowdown you get after you finish feels sluggish, but that's the point. Make it too fast and you would basically have a free basic attack guaranteed, similar to Hillbilly's low cooldown during Overdrive. The item survivors get to counter this spell is also not bad, and it's the only one you can deactivate with blindness perks, but regardless, you make so much noise while flying that most of the time this item is not that useful, and I think it's the weakest item survivors can get. If I could change one thing about flight, it would be making the spells not start on cooldown when the match begins, since I see no point as to why this is the case. Hillbilly, the Nurse, and the Blight can immediately use their powers for mobility. Vecna's flight is weaker than all of their powers. Next up, let's talk about his tracking and utility spell, Dispelling Sphere. Casting this spell will create a slow moving spear forwards that will reveal with killer instinct any survivor that is inside, and it will also temporarily block any of their magic items from working for 1 minute. As the killer, once a survivor is silenced by this spell, you can see what type of magic item they have, so you can play around it accordingly. This sphere is invisible to survivors, and it is only revealed if they enter it or if they have an archivist magic item. This is very similar to how I wanted School Merchant's drones to work like, and I am a huge fan of it. I think this is his most underrated spell, mainly because it's utility based, but it's super useful and it completely counters distortion. You can use it while in a chase to silence survivors' items, know what they're using, and also track survivors working on distant gens. I also think that out of all passive survivor items, the Archivist is by far one of the best, since it straight up gives you information that is not available otherwise, so you can see the orb coming towards you and dodge it. If I could change one thing about it, is that I don't think casting this spell should slow Vecna down, since it moves very slow by itself without add-ons. Flight of the Damned is his third spell, and it allows him to summon 5 skeletons in a cone in front of him that pass through obstacles and injure survivors on contact, like a shotgun. This is his projectile attack, and I think many can agree that this is a very underwhelming ability. First of all, the skeletons are summoned quite high, and they have a very thin hitbox, which means that survivors can dodge it very easily without even trying, and most importantly, as long as they crouch, they will avoid the skeletons, and they don't work like the artist crows. They will go forward no matter what, instead of going down on slopes or up in elevations. So the only way to effectively injure survivors with this spell is to either cast it towards an elevated spot so the skeletons hit the survivors no matter if they crouch, or use it when survivors are animation locked. It's really hard to get a hit with this spell, and I understand why it was done this way, since it's a shotgun that can bypass walls, which sounds broken, but this is by far the weakest projectile attack in the entire game. It doesn't even penetrate survivors, it can be easily countered by crouching, it has a very thin hitbox, it's very telegraphed, giving survivors enough time to react to it. The skeletons don't spawn on top of Vecna, but instead a bit in front of him, which means if you use it through walls, survivors can literally see the skeletons, and the worst part, that this has a 50-second cooldown. It's just a significantly worse projectile compared to Pyramid Head, who can spam it during a chase as much as he wants. The range of the skeletons is deceptively large. They are not infinite like the artist crows, but they can go pretty far, and I thought about using them in order to hit generators or healing survivors from afar. But the problem is that survivors that are repairing or healing have their hitbox lower to the ground, so the skeletons can completely miss you as long as you keep doing that action. The only way I got this tactic to work is when I use the Iridescent add-on that makes them spawn near the ground, preventing survivors from crouching, along with Discordance and Aura perks to know when they are repairing. And even then, the skeletons have a huge problem, since the magic items survivors get to counter it is the Night Watch items, which reveal the aura of the flying skeletons, making this tactic completely useless. And just as a reminder, this spell has a 50-second cooldown. So as it is right now, the only way to use this attack is either against survivors that still don't know how it works, or as a zoning tool to try and catch survivors that are crouching to prevent this attack. But guess what? This spell also slows you down by quite a lot. It takes a long time to activate, and it basically allows survivors to continue looping after dodging. This is the spell that needs the biggest changes, because it's completely pathetic how the most powerful spellcaster in the universe has skeletons weaker than the throwing knives of an egomaniac K-pop singer. Seriously, compare this projectile with literally any other projectile killer, and you can see how insanely weak it is, which is weird considering that the Unknown was the previous killer and its projectile was very well designed. I would legit buff the hell out of it, since it's the main iconic spell of Vecna. It's the most telegraphed projectile in the game, since with the magic item you can literally see the skeletons through walls, and it has a 50-second cooldown. Either reduce the cooldown and keep it as is, allowing Vecna to spam it more, or keep the cooldown but make the skeleton spawn closer to the ground by default and allow Vecna to vertically aim them so you can hit survivors below and above him in multi-floor maps, and maybe allow the skeletons to pierce survivors, since canonically this spell is able to in the D&D rules. I think no matter the buffs this spell will receive, Vecna won't be stronger than the artist grows. And finally, we have Mage Hand, his 4th spell and the main anti-loop power of his kit. Mage Hand allows you to either block a pallet for 4 seconds or lift pallets real quick. This is, in my opinion, the worst designed part of his kit, and let me explain why. First of all, the non-complicated part of his power is the pallet holding part, which sounds good, but it isn't, since you get slowed down so hard that survivors can just keep holding W or loop again. The only instance where holding the pallet is strong is on unsafe pallets, where survivors have to stun you in order to avoid a hit and reposition. I also tried to use it to hold a pallet while picking up a survivor, which, if it worked, would have been a great counter to background players, but the 4 seconds are not long enough, since again, when you cast this spell, you get a very long slowdown that doesn't allow you to interact with anything. In order to do this tactic, you need to use one specific add-on that makes the pallets hold for 1 extra second. And here is the complicated part, he's uplifting pallets. If the pallet is down, Vecna can lift it up again, and this can work in very specific cases where you lift a god pallet in order to hit a survivor that just threw it, but you need it to be absolutely perfect in order to get a hit. Most of the time, especially against a decent survivor, and especially if you don't use the add-on that makes Mage Hand lift pallets 50% faster, the survivors can simply keep running or at worst stun you back, making this by far the weakest anti-loop power in the game, since it's a worse version of the Doctor's Electroshock with a massive cooldown and the potential to hit you back. And guess what killer also comes with a perk that makes pallet stuns 25% stronger. The reason I dislike this spell is the same reason I dislike the skeleton spell. It's an anti-loop spell that requires perfect timing on a perfect scenario in order to work. It requires 2 add-ons to become useful, and all of that locked behind a 50-second cooldown when killers like Pyramid Head can just straight up get a hit with no conditions attached, or Doctor, which has a spammable anti-loop that also gives survivors madness. And we didn't even talk about the magic item survivors get to counter this spell, because it is one of the strongest. The Interloper will not only show you the aura of the pallets where Mage Hand is, it also gives you a 7% haste bonus for 3 seconds, completely countering you no matter what, unless you use Dispelling Sphere to deactivate the magic item, which, reminder, it has a 50-second cooldown. And the worst part is that Vecna has a green add-on that seems to want to counter this, but I tried it in the hopes of finding a cool build to run, and I discovered that this add-on is completely useless, since the haste it gives you only lasts for 2 seconds, and it's wasted on the slowdown you get when you use Mage Hand. This single spell is what will break Vecna for newer players, since if they use it incorrectly, it's basically any means necessary for survivors, and one of the most powerful characters lore-wise, lifting the pallet yourself only to be stunned by survivors all while you have a perk that makes stuns worse is very frustrating. Try to explain to a new or casual player that bought the DLC because they are fans of the license how to use Mage Hand efficiently. But the problem is that if they buff Mage Hand a lot, it just becomes a different flavor of Scamper, where survivors will get hit as long as you have this spell with nothing they can do to counter it. When I watched the livestream and heard the word Mage Hand, I thought this ability would have allowed you to break pallets from a distance, similar to how you could do it in an anniversary event, but also be able to break breakable walls and generators from afar, maybe even block windows with the hand. I'm not gonna pretend I understand how to balance Mage Hand, because this is not a type of power I would have ever designed for Dead by Daylight, so at most, my only suggestion is to make the 2 low rarity Mage Hand add-ons base kit. And now let's talk about my favorite part of this DLC by far, and that's the 2 special items you can get if you roll a d20, the Eye of Vecna and the Hand of Vecna. When you get these items, Vecna will know, and once you attune them, a cool voice line will play, and the survivors will be able to use these items by interacting with lockers. The Eye of Vecna is the first magic item you can get. When you attune this item, one of your eyes will start glowing, and you will gain the power of invisibility. In order to trigger it, just fast exit a locker, and you will see yourself with a yellow aura, as well as gain a speed boost for 12 seconds at the cost of injuring yourself. This ability is extremely fun, and I loved using it. It's literally a new mechanic in the game, and I low-key wish these types of items existed in the game base kit as a sort of legendary, because it's just so much fun. As the killer, however, you can hear the survivor's steps and see grass falling around them, similar to the spirit, so in a strictly technical sense, you can kinda counterplay this item, but it's really hard. The second item you can get is straight up busted, and that's the Hand of Vecna. Just like the eye, you attune it and the survivor will have a cool hand glow. To activate it, just enter a locker while healthy and you will instantly be teleported to the furthest away locker in the map. Both of these abilities also trigger Killer Instinct once their effect ends to give Vecna a heads up of your location. The Hand of Vecna is literally a get out of jail card for free. Imagine using it by leading the killer to the basement and just disappearing. This ability is just busted, and it will make Vecna waste a lot of time having to go to the other corner of the map to get this. And fun fact, if a survivor is on death hook while holding one of the special items, you can instantly kill them, similar to Pyramid Head's Judgment, getting the item back with a unique animation. But still, I love these items. In my opinion, Vecna is by far the best designed killer in the entire game that makes survivors have fun. And the best part is that it doesn't feel unfair like with the Singularity, because the items do not cancel your power entirely, since survivors can only have 2 magic passive items and 1 special item, and you can deactivate them with Dispelling Sphere. But what I fear is that the actual reason I have fun against Vecna is because of how terribly easy he is to counter and also the novelty of the PTB. So I have very high hopes that the PTB changes coming soon will fix the problems Vecna has on his kit. Overall, I would still say that this killer is very well designed and a love letter to Dungeons and Dragons fans, and the voice lines by Matt Mercer add a lot of personality to this killer while playing. Also, it's incredibly cool how little bugs Vecna has, despite having one of the most complex powers I've seen in the game. And now let's quickly talk about the perks from this chapter, including perks from survivors, and see how cool they are. Dark Arrogance will increase the duration of blinds as well as pallet stuns by 25%, and in exchange, your vault speed increases by 20%. This is a very weird perk that feels like it was either changed in the last second, because currently it's just a worse version of Bamboozle that comes with a huge penalty, and right now the only way to properly use it is to combine it with Bamboozle and Superior Anatomy for vault speed builds. And think about it for a second, this perk comes with a huge drawback similar to Rapid Brutality, but that perk gives you a unique effect that counters the penalty, whereas Dark Arrogance just gives you at best 5% extra of what Bamboozle's secondary effect is. I think making this perk increase the speed at which you pick up survivors would make it unique enough where people might use it, or maybe rework it so that it's your basic attack range which is increased, similar to Coup de Grace, since then it would be a double-edged sword perk. You can try and greet a hit in a pallet loop, but if the survivor stuns you, you get punished harder. Languid Touch will make any survivors that scare of crows exhausted for 10 seconds, which counters perks like Lithe or Sprint Burst and even Background Player. I find it interesting since it's very easy to activate, and it's not a bad perk at all, but I don't think players will use it as much since it's very similar to Mindbreaker, where the effects are great, but you won't actively feel them as the killer, making this perk seem useless when in reality it's actually decent. Weave Attunement is one of the weirdest perks ever. Basically, once an item is depleted, survivors will forcibly drop it and you can see the auras around dropped items within 8 meters of them. Once a survivor picks up any item, they also suffer from the Oblivious status effect. I guess it makes a great combo with Hoarder and Franklin's Demise, and it also kinda counters Hyper Focus, since once the toolbox is gone, survivors will interrupt their repair progress and reset the hyper focus stacks, but I still don't see this perk being meta anytime soon. If you're interested on this killer due to the teachable perks, my recommendation is that you save up your money, because he has very weak teachables compared to the last 4 killer releases, which all came with at least one solid choice like Ultimate Weapon, Friends Till the End, Forced Hesitation or Unforeseen. And now let's talk about the Bard survivors that are also part of this DLC, and in my opinion they are fantastic additions to the game. For the first time aside from Gabriel, we have a non-human character as Aestri Yazar is actually an elf, but let's talk about their perks. Bardic Inspiration is the newest meme perk in the game, which will allow you to play a performance to the survivors and throw a d20, which depending on the number you get, will grant survivors a boost on their skill checks. This is, most of the time, a worthless meme perk, especially in solo queue. The issue is that this perk is designed in such a way that it helps survive with friends teams that stack it with hyper-focus stakeout and toolboxes. So, no matter how much I absolutely love the ability to play a musical instrument during a DbD match, the fact that they added a Gen Rush perk exclusive for stacked teams in the same patch where Gen Regression perks are nerfed is in really bad taste. And I hate saying this because this is one of the most unique perks in the game, and it's sad to see it exclusively used to either troll or make the game miserable for killers. Mirrored Illusion, their next perk, on the other hand, is really cool. This perk will allow you to cast a fake clone of yourself that will be performing an action depending on which interactable you spawn them at, and this illusion will last for 2 minutes. I originally thought that it was going to be a perk kinda like Red Herring or the Pebble, where nobody will use this, but it's actually really interesting as from afar, it does look like a survivor repairing a generator, so I definitely see this perk being used by troll teams and troll builds, and I love how unique it is without it being game breaking. And finally, we have Still Sight, a perk that reveals the aura of any chests, generators, as well as the killer around 18 meters of you as long as you stand still for 4 seconds. And no, it doesn't work while you're interacting with something, so you cannot see if the killer is coming while repairing. This perk was changed, since originally it allowed you to see the aura of totems, rendering the rest of totem perks completely redundant. But in my personal opinion, this is one of the best aura reading perks in the game, way better than Visionary or the new Alan Wake boon perk, but it's still not that good. And that's all I can say about this DLC's content, and I can assure you that behavior is going to make changes before the live release, so we will have to wait and see. Let me know in the comments what you think of this DLC, thank you for watching and have a nice day.